Okay, Eyal Weizman, you are director, founder of forensic architecture. You have a very interesting history because the Israeli government sent you to London to supervise an exhibition on architecture, Israeli architecture, and you presented some projects of settlements, and that was scandal at that moment. What happened? Just curiosity.
It's a, it's a little bit of an old scandal, but here's the story. When I just graduated from architecture, I came back to work in Israel. I had an office in Israel. And because I came from London and was assumed to have sensibility to exhibition, etc., I was asked by the Association of Israeli Architects to represent the best of Israeli architecture. And very quietly, together with my partner Rafi Segal, we have prepared what we thought was the best of Israeli architecture, and that was the colonial architecture in the settlements. Of course, we were cynical, but on the other hand, we thought so much architecture was used in the West Bank to suppress human rights that the occupation of Palestine was not only a military occupation, it was a civilian occupation. This is why we call this exhibition a civilian occupation. And we made a big deal in calling for the responsibility of architects and saying they are responsible for human rights violation. They are part of the occupation. They are like soldiers. Houses are like tanks in taking over the territory. So the exhibition was very straightforward. We showed photographs and plans of Israeli settlements, and these were finally censored, of course. The organization we printed some 5,000 copies, and they were pulped or burned, and the exhibition never happened. Of course, is in any case of censorship, what finally happens is that when you censor something, everybody want to know what was censored. So this exhibition did not appear in the Congress where it was meant to, but it appeared in many galleries and museums worldwide. So that was the beginning of sorts.
You are convinced that architecture is not a political activity, ingenuous political activity. It has some very important consequences on people from the perspective of measuring violence.
Well, there's two ways really that I think as architects we can think about politics. It is very obvious for any architect. There's no news about the fact that architecture is political. Architecture is about land and money. And land and money in this country, in any country in the world, is a highly political thing. The question is, how can we read politics from architecture? On the one hand, we can look at architecture as if we are archaeologists coming from the future and looking at the ruins of our own society and trying to understand from the remnants, from the built fabric, from some walls. You know, like archaeologists, they found a corner of a building or an old doorway, and they try to tell you a story of society, how they lived, how the economy, how the politics was there, what was the culture, etc. This is one way in which we do. So we feel ourselves right now as archaeologists of the present. No? So for us, any building, this building right now is a piece of archaeology, and we would read the culture and politics from it. On the other hand, architecture is incredibly useful in understanding other forms of data and other kinds of violence. The reason really is that right now most conflict worldwide, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in the Americas, in Central America, are urban conflicts. Wars happen in the city. There's hardly any war, old-fashioned war, in the field of army against army fighting or tanks in an open field. Today we fight in the cities. And when we fight in the cities, civilians are in the part of the conflict field, and civilians get hurt or killed in there. So architectural evidence becomes very important to understand the field of contemporary conflict. It is very important in order to reconstruct the very basic question of any investigative journalist or any human rights researcher or any historian for that matter, what happened here? And the traces are left on the architecture. And we are architectural readers. We are readers of architecture. We know how to analyze scratches or rubble, or to see a pile of rubble and to say, how did it got there? What destroyed it? Was the violence coming from different side? Was there a firefight? Or was it a plane that has destroyed it? In that way, this is a kind of archaeology of conflict. On the other hand, we know that war that happened in the city and increasingly now generate enormous amount of data, because when you have civilians and journalists in a battlefield, everybody takes out now their smartphone and record images or clips and immediately upload them online or onto some cloud. And our way of understanding conflict right now is very much from, not from professional journalists, but from the citizen journalists that are living in conflict and sometimes take enormous risk in order to share their experience with us. You know, it's much easier to run away when you have an attack. But sometimes people are rather brave, and rather than running away, they turn around, they take the picture because they want to share with the world the realities of what is happening. Of course, it's not only civilians. Militants are using it, militaries are using it, and also propaganda is using it. The thing is that to understand all those images, to make sense of what has happened, you need to view them through architectural models. So we would build a model of a city, and we would put all those smartphone perspectives in there. And you can move between one camera and the next through the city, navigate through the environment in order to reconstruct what has happened. In that sense, architecture is not like an archaeology, but architecture functions for us like an optical device, like a device for seeing. Like it is the means of making relation between many images and telling a story. We are about 15. There are about 15 or 20 of us. The majority are architects like me, trained as practicing architects. Some of us are architectural historians. Again, this is my formal training. But we work also a lot with filmmakers and with photographers. The necessity of interpreting images, of looking close at what are the details within images, understanding the technicity of images, require image practitioners to work with us. So then there are those. There's of course artists that work with us, editors, there are coders, people that write code and program computer, because we sometimes have to design our own software because the kind of things that we need to do, there are no software packages for that. So we design software and we publish it later on open source online. And of course lawyers, of course scientists, and very many experts that sometimes drop in and out of the office. But let's say it's an extremely multidisciplinary and international practice. Also, something that is absolutely important for us is that whenever we investigate a case, say we work now on a big case in Mexico on disappeared people, or we work in Guatemala, or we work in Indonesia, we would always try to employ people from that area so that we are not researching something as complete strangers, and that we are embedded also within groups that are local, that undertake political struggle on the site. It's always very important for us to establish connection with groups, with political groups, with grassroots groups on the ground, and that the investigation really is a kind of a co-production between us in London and the people on the ground, and we come, they come, etc. And this is how knowledge is being produced.
The truth, contrasted truth of forensic architecture has shown what really happened with government and international institutions. Often, although people don't know, for example, you prove the destruction after destruction of Al Arabib, the city, or also the research, forensic research, which is done now for the recognition of disappeared people, also come from some research that you carry out on Joseph Mengele's skull. These are big success stories, right?
Well, some of what we do are historical research into forensic techniques. The Mengele sits there. Other cases that we do are really what we call counter-forensics. You know, forensics is what the state does, is how the state employs the police to survey the citizens on the ground. What we do as citizens, we invert the forensic gaze. We are citizens, and the criminal is the state. And the problem when the state is the criminal is that the state always knows more, had more access to information. They have the better technology. They see more. They have their satellites, etc. We need to find techniques that mobilize our advantage. That is creativity, our kind of ideas as artists and architects, how we can actually do it. And yes, indeed, we had some success in exposing crimes of state. We made the Israeli state realize that their story of a killing that happened in the Israeli Negev was completely wrong. We showed by taking testimonies from Bedouins on the ground, from activists, that the police story, the police was saying this Bedouin man that we shot was a terrorist, and we shot him in self-defense, and we showed it was the story was completely different. Just a week ago, we released a very big investigation for us that we undertook together with Human Rights Watch and Bellingcat, where we showed that the Americans were bombing a place in Syria, in Idlib, and they claimed that was a community center for Al-Qaeda activists. And we showed, no, what you bombed was a mosque. You did not even know what you bombed, and with 30 to 50 civilian killed in this place. We have shown the Russians bombing hospitals in Aleppo. We showed somehow the responsibility of European nations for drowning of migrants in the Mediterranean Sea. This is a group within our practice called forensic oceanography. They work on the ocean. And we made mapping of boats that were left to die, or that they were collided with other boats and sank, and that the European, the EU agencies that could have intervened and saved people were failing to save them. So you see, we always we have everybody's our enemy. No, all states. We don't take any sides in that, and all those states obviously try to defend themselves against us. And all of them, when they try to defend themselves, they're all very similar. When the Kremlin make an announcement, when the CENTCOM, the American Pentagon, make an announcement, when the Israeli government makes an announcement, or when the EU makes an announcement, they always deny. They always deny responsibility. When they cannot deny, when we actually show the evidence, the images, the models, hear it how it happens, they start attacking us personally, or they start attacking, they say, how come architects, how come artists are investigating us? They feel very out of balance because they're not used to this kind of investigation. They're used to journalists, they're used to human rights people doing it, but they're absolutely not used to architects, artists, and filmmakers doing it. And our evidence is very accessible, and it is very often kind of presented online or in newspapers. It's very well covered in the media, because we understand that evidence is not only about discovering the truth has to be made public. The truth has to speak to people. The truth has to move people into political action. And sometimes this is achieved through our kind of techniques. And what you see up there in the exhibition really is the products of our work. And sometimes to some people they could be mistaken as artwork because, you know, they're very visual, they're very captivating. They're films and big images and models, etc. They're very interesting objects, I think. And this is what we hope for an exhibition like that people come to see art, and people are interested in cultural things, and through that we would bring the political issues at stake. Through that we will discuss things that are beyond what is normally the domain of the art. So this is something that is very important for us, to break the borders of what constitute art and bring it into public discussion, into juridical, political and human rights debate, and make those bridges from all directions.
Let's hope it's like this. Let's hope people can become aware and be in favor of truth, of course. We have time for two questions only. One of them is whether whether cities are being rebuilt for war.
Some cities, you know, so much war happened in city that anyone that rebuilds something in cities would rebuild it with their tactical advantage in mind. You know, for the resistance, very often small streets and alleyways are very good to resist an occupying military. I remember that when the Israeli military tried to go into the center of Gaza or into the center of the cities in the West Bank, Jenin, Ramallah, Hebron, etc., sometimes they get lost in the maze of streets, and it's a great advantage for the resistance. So when they would rebuild it in a complex way. When the occupying military will rebuild, they would say, let's modernize it. Let's make straight lines and big buildings and big open spaces. And they would say this is for hygiene reason, or this is for more technically reasonable, or they would argue it in many other ways. But actually, a straight road is a road in which you can bring the tanks through, and big towers is where you can put your snipers and you can control the area from. So the city, both in its destruction and its reconstruction, it's an act of war. War, it's the war of homes and streets. And architecture and warfare here are very related. I'll give you an example. After Israel destroyed the refugee camp of Jenin, in 2002 they entered and they could not move through the little street. So they brought the bulldozers, and the bulldozers cut big roads by destroying the houses, and they made like a big X through the city. When it was to be rebuilt, and this was a big donation of the Red Crescent, they got money from it's a branch of the Red Cross in the Islamic world. The Red Crescent gave money to rebuild it. There was a big debate. The resistance fighter wanted it to rebuild very complex. But the insurance company said, no, if we build it small, the tanks would again destroy the routes. So they built the streets exactly as wide as the width of a tank, so that if the tank moves in, it will not destroy the street. But of course, it makes no sense as a defense strategy to do it like that. And therefore, I think that made the city more vulnerable to build it like that.
No time, sorry. They're coming to fetch you. 30 seconds only. What happened when Trump launched the other day big bomb, the mother of all bombs. What happened when Trump launched this bomb?
This is not a case that we have investigated, but we have great concern about this particular bombing because it is normalizing a kind of munition that should not be used, because this munition cannot make any distinction between civilians and militant. Its destruction radius is 1.5 kilometers. Anyone that stands 1.5 kilometers next to it would be annihilated, whether they are children, families, or militants. And of course, now one bomb of that was dropped, but if we get used to the fact that we can drop bombs like that, civilians will be hurt. And our heart is always, and our struggle is always with the civilians against the militaries. So I think it's a very, very bad news.
Eyal, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much for listening to us.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation with
He
you.
disfrutado mucho esta conversación.